Good evening. I'm Dr. Kirsty Graham from the University of York, and I am a primatologist. Tonight we are going to watch a documentary about Jane Goodall, one of the first primatologists, cut from over 100 hours of unseen National Geographic footage. When I meet someone new and tell them that I study primates, the most common response is, "Oh, like Jane Goodall?" And then I have to think about the complicated thoughts that I have about Jane Goodall as a person, a primatologist, and a representation. Jane Goodall, Dian Fossey, and Bruta Geldekas have left a lasting impact on how the world sees primatologists. They captured the world's imagination with their descriptions of great ape behavior. Jane Goodall discovered that chimpanzees use sticks to fish for termites. They use tools. This was the first time tools had been seen in non-human species, and it fundamentally changed our conception of animal cognition. Jane has inspired a great number of primatologists and biologists in general, but there remain some complications in how she is represented. The first of the complicated impacts is that primatology is often seen as a women's subject. I've had people tell me that women study primates because their cute infants remind them of human babies, or that it's somehow an easier science. It's not. Fieldwork is hard. We spend long periods of time in harsh conditions following primates through forests and grasslands all day, every day. And then we have to analyze our data just like any other scientist. It's not an easier science. And as for being a women's subject, Jane Goodall has had the wonderful influence of making it feel like a field that women can be part of and successful in, and there is now gender parity overall, but not yet in the highest positions or the impact of publications. Having women like Jane Goodall and Dian Fossey in highly visible positions helps the representation of women in primatology. But much like lean-in feminism, it can't change the structural reasons why women, and especially women of colour, are disadvantaged in academia. The second complicated impact is the view of how humans should interact with other primates. In the early days at Gombe in Tanzania, Jane fed the chimps and came into physical contact with them. But great apes are very vulnerable to human diseases, and after a polio epidemic among the Gombe chimps, Jane stopped interacting with them that way. That's not a personal criticism. A lot of the early primatologists interacted with primates in a way we now know is harmful. But those iconic photos and videos remain embedded in public imagination. Today we have a substantial and highly profitable pet trade and tourism and entertainment industry built on getting to touch, feed, and take photos with other primates. As well as having devastating consequences for the welfare of the individual primates, we now know that this negatively impacts the public's perception of the need to conserve wild populations. And I've had to add a bit to my talk today, because we've had a small victory for animal welfare. In the Instagram, the photo sharing app has introduced a warning for hashtags that direct people to animal selfies, recognizing that these images are harmful because of the way they encourage people to interact with other species. So now if you search for a hashtag for an animal selfie, then you are met with the following warning. Instagram warns you are searching for a hashtag that may be associated with posts that encourage harmful behavior to animals and the environment. So that was a small win today. But did you know that it is still legal to own a small monkey as a pet in the UK? Monkeys are intelligent social animals that should not be kept as pets because it is absolutely impossible to meet all their needs. Jane Goodall is a strong advocate against the trade in primate pets and recognizes that images of interacting with cute primates drives this trade. That's why it's a complicated picture. Jane Goodall as a person has taught us so much and contributed so much to primate welfare and conservation, but as a representation is still often confounded with the primate methods she and others were using in the 60s and 70s. The third complicated impact, and one that has been particularly pervasive in European and North American imagination, as will be clear in this film, is that primatology is often displayed and described as white researcher goes into empty African wilderness. That's hugely problematic. In reality, research doesn't happen in a vacuum. When I go to my field site, I travel to Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a city with a population of 9.5 million people, where I meet with professors and graduate students at the University of Kinshasa and government officials at the Ministry of Scientific Research. And when I fly to my field site, it's not in an empty forest, it's in a group of villages of 1,500 people. As researchers, we must lay open our methods and situate ourselves and our research in the places that we go to. Erasing field assistants, collaborators, professors, government officials in the DR Congo from the narrative of my research experience would be bizarre and inexcusable. But Jane as a representation is often used to embody exactly that. She's portrayed as an attractive young white woman in empty forest with chimpanzees, and this film won't correct itself on that. In fact, the trailer for the film in text says, "One woman went where no man dared to go." And that may be true of white researchers, but definitely not of the Tanzanians that live around Gombe. But when Jane speaks at conferences, she emphasizes the importance of people in her research and conservation, and the need for collaboration among everyone. So again, Jane the person conflicts with Jane the representation. That must be a challenge about living your life so publicly. The things that you do when you are younger and the images that come to represent you stick forever. And that's why there's no easy response to, "Oh, so are you going to be the next Jane Goodall?" For the second part of the talk, I'd like to focus on Jane Goodall the person. I met Jane Goodall several years ago and was really struck by the experience. I studied for my PhD at the University of St Andrews in Scotland. The year I started was St Andrews' 600th anniversary, and they were giving out a number of honorary degrees. One of the recipients was Jane Goodall, and I was really excited to see her speak in person. Then, about a week into my PhD, I got an email asking if I wanted to go to dinner with Jane and several other students and faculty. I don't think I'd ever expected to meet Jane, let alone have dinner with her. Yet here we were, sitting in a Thai restaurant talking about chimpanzees and bonobos. One of the things that struck me about Jane was how grandmotherly she is. Jane is now 83 years old, about the same age as my own grandma. An incredible, vibrant, inspiring person in her own right. My grandma has been a really big influence in my love of nature, birds, bugs, gardens, wildlife, countryside. She has so much energy. But when I picture that Jane Goodall is the same age as my grandma and that she's still traveling 300 days a year, I just can't comprehend how exhausting that must be for her. Jane travels constantly to talk about chimpanzee conservation and conservation in general. It's a long time since Jane first went to study the chimpanzees at Gombe, and Jane now dedicates most of her energy to advocating for primate welfare and conservation. In 1977, Jane founded the Jane Goodall Institute to support research and conservation at Gombe and conservation in the surrounding area. This has since been scaled up to supporting conservation for chimpanzees across Africa, with a particular focus on engaging local communities in conservation projects. Jane has not only focused her efforts on wild chimpanzees, she has been an extremely vocal advocate of chimpanzees in captivity. In the 70s and 80s, on trips to the US, Jane was shocked by the conditions of laboratory chimpanzees and started to lobby for improved conditions and protection. Her efforts, alongside many others, led to greatly improved conditions in America, until finally, in 2015, the US National Institutes of Health decided to completely stop testing on chimpanzees in the lab, and all lab chimpanzees have been moved into sanctuaries for retirement. It's really amazing. And all captive chimpanzees in America are now protected by the Endangered Species Act, where they were previously exempt. These are major improvements in the lives of captive chimpanzees, and Jane Goodall deserves a lot of the credit for putting pressure on labs, zoos, and government to improve the lives of chimpanzees in captivity. Then, in 1991, Jane and a group of young people co-founded Roots and Shoots, a conservation program for young people in 100 countries around the world. On the program's website, it says that Roots and Shoots provides sets of activities for teachers to use both in and out of the classroom to encourage pupils to learn about people, animals, and their local environment. I love this model for environmental and conservation education. Conservation doesn't just happen in a distant country. Roots and Shoots shows kids what's going on in their own backyard. There are hundreds of Roots and Shoots groups in the UK. Around Derby, there's one at Derby Moor Community Sports College Trust, Derby College, Portway Junior School, and Little Eaton Primary School. It's so cool that your local schools can be part of an organisation that links schools around the world. Jane Goodall's idea for teaching kids about the environment has grown into an international network. That's an incredible thing to do. I hope that what you've taken from this talk is that Jane Goodall is not perfect. There are a lot of things about the way that she has been represented that pose problems, but that she has done an immense amount of good, inspiring and educating young people and dedicating herself completely to conservation. She has led a wonderful, awkward, dynamic, nuanced life, and while this documentary will give you a glimpse into her younger life and the lives of chimpanzees at Gombe, I would encourage you all to do a bit more research. I am a scientist after all.